Hey, and welcome back to more musings from man sitting next to the toilet. I spoke with Ari Harow, who is the CEO of Itur Financial Intelligence, which, as the name suggests, helps companies and governments investigate other people's money. Now, I can't say that we spent too much time talking about that topic. Interesting, no doubt, that world must be. Instead, we focused on Ari's life prior to starting the company. And if you look up Ari, you'll see that he had a really distinguished career serving under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also that he was accused of fraud for violating a conflict of interest agreement while serving in government, and that he's had to give testimony in the corruption investigations into Netanyahu. He couldn't go into details on any of that stuff for understandable reasons. But it was fascinating to hear what all this does to a person. I mean, imagine your whole life, everything that you've done, and all that gets rocked to the core because of a mistake, even if it's just a perceived mistake. And that mistake becomes known to countless amounts of people. I mean, are you all of a sudden a different person? Does the alleged mistake define you forever? What about all the good that you did before that? And as I said, this wasn't much of a conversation about how we relate to technology. But that's the cool thing about being a tyrant in my little fiefdom. I get to bend some of the rules. So, anyway, I'm not ashamed to say that I really enjoyed my time with Ari. I can say that I didn't get the sense, not for 1 second, that I was sitting with a moral monster. And far from it. And I'm curious to hear what you all think. Anyway, here's our conversation. Hope you enjoy.
Let's get all the awkward energy out of out of our systems.
Let's do it.
How do you get your awkward energy out of your system? Like when you go to a conference or something, right?
Yeah.
And there's just people in any other setting that you can think of, you wouldn't want to talk to them, right? You have nothing in common with these people.
Right.
What do you do?
Glass of wine. Glass of red wine. Always takes off the edge.
Just wine?
Oh,
I'm trying to get
I'm
you in trouble.
definitely I'm definitely a Scotch fan as well. That's more for later in the evening. I wouldn't start off the evening with.
Imagine. Actually, what do you think? Okay, if you went to a conference and they just served hard liquor and I don't know joints and stuff like this, like what would it be more productive, less productive? I mean, the whole point of that is to make human connections, no?
Yeah,
And that really helps.
there's no question. It it tears down the facade. But there are people that can handle their alcohol, and there's people that cannot.
In what bucket do you fall?
I'm not I'm a mild and
Sporadic.
I wouldn't call it sporadic, but I would say that it is very tempered. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time you tried alcohol?
So I grew up in a home where my father was not a drinker, still is not a drinker.
Really?
Yeah.
Never.
I mean, even Kiddush on Shabbat, he'll have grape juice till today. No wine, nothing.
Funny. My in-laws are the same.
Uh-huh.
And my wife is also pretty much the same.
Okay. So yeah. So it was later. I think after I finished the army, I ended up moving to New York City for a couple years.
Yeah.
And yeah, single guy on the Upper West Side. I was introduced to a lot of things.
Do you remember what your first drink was?
I do not.
No?
I do not.
Must have been a hell of a night. No, my first drink, my father gave me a Budweiser when I was 10 at a family barbecue. And I remember actually my lower jaw being sort of slightly numb. And I do kind of remember a buzz then when I was 10. And my father said something to me like, better you learn this at home than anywhere else, or something like that.
Yeah. So
But yes, you didn't get that kind of life lesson from your
no,
your parents
definitely not at home.
on the
But
streets of New York.
yeah, yeah. But we've made up for it, so it's all good.
Man, you've had some life you've led.
Yeah, yeah.
How I mean, first of all, you moved to Israel in what year was this?
1985.
1985.
Summer of 1985.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's almost 40 years ago.
Yeah, we're closing in on 40 years in Israel.
Holy
Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
Okay. But 1985 Israel, by the way, that's the year I was born. And
It
that
was a good year for both of us.
exactly. But I mean that year, like Israel must so much has changed, right? In those whatever it is, 37 years.
Yeah, I mean the country has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
I would say that the level of growth in so many different sectors and felt by the average person living in this country is probably as dramatic as the first 40 years of the country.
Mm.
The jump has just been astronomical.
Yeah. Do you I was just having a conversation with this woman that runs this grocery across the street from my house. And she was whining about how the people of Tel Aviv are not what they used to be, more spoiled, just wasteful. And I wonder, do you sense the same thing amongst Israelis now that they get wealthier?
Um, not as much. I think that's it's always very easy to look back at the good old days when everybody was nice and friendly and
Right.
polite and clean and there were no problems, and it's just not reality. I
Yeah.
think that one thing that has not changed from 1948 till today is the military service,
Mhm.
and that's the great equalizer in this country. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter whether you're from North Tel Aviv or from Dimona. You're going in and you're in that melting pot, and I think it brings everybody down to a certain reality that
Yeah.
that takes off that type of edge.
So your oldest now is in the army, right?
Correct.
And he or she? She, right?
She.
And where is she serving?
Military intelligence.
Okay. In one of the 8 units?
Well, her unit has another name, and it's actually very funny for me when she says, Abba, I can't tell you what we're doing. But no, it's not one of the 8 units, but another interesting unit within intelligence.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how many people do they take a year, those units?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
I don't know what the numbers are.
Yeah.
But I was very excited when she got in, and
Why?
a lot of pride.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Just because the work that you thought that you would be doing?
Well, I think in general, regardless of what unit your child ends up in, especially as someone who made Aliyah as a child and served in the army, I can tell you that the moment I saw her on uniform, right, in Madim,
Yeah.
was the moment I said to myself, okay, I did something right. It was really that impactful for me to see my child serving the state of Israel, and it was amazing. The fact that she ended up in a unit that is interesting and impactful is just the icing on the cake.
Tell me more about that, because it's a discussion my wife and I have basically since the birth of our first son. We have 3, as I told you. And she worries, and I worry to a certain extent as well about what that means, right? I mean,
Yeah.
To wake up one day and have that terrible phone call. That sort of worry runs through her mind frequently, I would say.
Yeah.
But when you saw your kid in uniform, you felt a sense of pride, right?
Yeah.
You finally felt as if you did something right, which is kind of crazy.
Right.
To think about your story, but yeah.
I mean, I hear you, and it's definitely something that parents, worry about. But at the same time, as a father of 3, You also worry when they cross the street, right? Or when they take
Yeah.
the bus to school or when they go on a field trip or whatever it is. And I think that as a parent, you never worry. You never stop worrying, rather. And for me, and it's funny, I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, a doctor friend, and we were talking about how 'cause I spent a number of years living in the U.S.
Yeah.
Later, as an adult, and as did
Drinking liquor and
oh yeah, that in the off hours. And my friend as well went to medical school there and worked there for a while. And we were saying how yeah, the fear of a meaningless end in the U.S. Um, is much more worrisome than, God forbid, something happening here. I mean, there is a sense of meaning to your life when you serve in the army, and even walking down the street. God forbid, people who are you know harmed or killed in terror attacks. There's meaning to that. At least that's the way. That's the way I feel, and that's the way I was raised.
yeah.
So you don't want any of that for your children or for
Right.
anybody for that matter.
Right.
But that's part of living.
Yeah, it's I mean, it is a question of sacrifice, right? Of how much do you want to give up? How much are you willing to give up for this crazy project that is
Right.
Israel, right?
Right.
And some people really do sacrifice their kids. I mean, it's
Horrific.
yeah, it's horrible, right?
Yeah.
I can't go there mentally. I don't want to enter that mental space.
Yeah.
But it does come with those benefits that you mentioned, right? Where it pits you into Israeli society, right? Like I remember, so I served in the military for a year. I was in I don't remember what it's called in English, but it's Kishei Chutz. How would you translate that?
Foreign relations.
Something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I was there for a year, and I was old. I was 27. Everyone around me was
Right. Very old.
yeah, super old. Everyone around me was 18, 19. And but I got this insight into Israeli society. I was like, oh, that's why the restaurant service here is so bad. It's like these people around me. These are the waiters and the waitresses. It's gotten better, but it's just you get a window into society here, and then of course there's all the responsibility and all the things that come along with it that someone that grew up in the U.S. you just don't get at that age.
Right.
And that if you're in one of those elite units that does such meaningful and heavy duty, it's got to transform you and put you on this trajectory for life that's unlike anything that most other people in the West, say, understand, right?
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in certain cases, even prior to serving in the military, and then definitely in military service, I can tell you for myself, I was 12 years old when we moved to Israel. We made Aliyah.
Yeah.
Between that age and and 18 when I went into the army, I lost a number of people in my orbit to terror attacks.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. There were people in school and people that I knew, and
In school?
yeah, and it even as a child, as a teenager, it changes the way you look at this country, and you look at life, and you look at your purpose in life.
Yeah.
And I think that the army crystallizes that even further. And I completely agree. I mean, when you're 18 or 19 or 20 in the U.S. and you're at your frat house and you're drinking your whatever it is you're drinking and you're having a great time, and that's great. That's fantastic. Nothing negative with that. But here, at those same evenings, you're spending patrolling the border in Lebanon or something else of that nature, and it just changes your perception on many things, and that stays with you for the rest of your life.
When you said that you lost friends or people that you knew when you were a kid in school, I mean, how did your parents react?
I mean, it's never easy. it's never easy.
But they didn't freak out and say, "Oh my God, what did we do? Like, we
No.
gotta get out of here."
So I come from a very idealistic um, family.
Mm-hmm.
We moved to Israel right around the same time as my grandparents and a bunch of my uncles and aunts, and it was really like
Okay.
a broad-based family decision, and there was a deep-seated ideology way before then that Israel's the place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Very active, and I'd say even prominent family in Los Angeles. Um, Founded, or one of the founders of the Jewish Day School and some of the synagogues and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and living a very good life there, very successful, and they all just decided that life is more than that, and Israel is something that we don't just believe in from afar, and they moved out here, and I think that hand in hand with that type of decision is the trials and tribulations
Yeah.
that you have to deal with as an Israeli, as someone who's put themselves out there.
Did you? I always I wonder about the impact of experiencing someone's death close to you at such a young age and what that does to a person.
Right.
Um, yeah. Like for example, my I remember my grandmother. That was the first funeral that I went to. But it was like, okay, she was old. She was in her 80s. She was a bit sick.
Right.
Nothing really too interesting, or it wasn't extraordinary, right? But if a kid in your school gets killed in some terrorist attack, I mean, I would imagine that the takeaway that you have from that as a kid is like, oh Christ, that could have been me.
Yeah. You definitely it changes your perspective on things. I think that there was definitely an impact throughout high school when we had to deal with these
Mm-hmm.
type of events, because there were multiple. I mean, I grew up in the Shomron, in Samaria.
Okay.
So
Where exactly?
Neve Eliza, Karnei Shomron. So it's about 20 minutes east of Kfar Saba.
Okay.
And back in those days, you were really on the front line, and there were, unfortunately, multiple events over the course of my teenage years. But the one, I would say, event that really, or the one uh, terror attack, murder that really shifted my path in life was actually when I was in the military, when I was in the Army. I had a friend who was a Canadian volunteer, came to Israel to serve. He was older than everybody else. We were 19 at the time. He was 24 post college, and his name was Yoshua Friedberg.
Okay.
And he volunteered. He was in our Golani unit, and towards the end of our advanced training, he was chosen to go to officer training school, and on a it was the day before Purim, and he was hitching a ride out of Jerusalem, got into a car with what seemed to be three Orthodox Jews with kippot on their head and tzitzit out, and a minute or two into their drive towards Tel Aviv, they turned around and murdered him. And for me, as you know, as someone who served, the people in your immediate surrounding your unit, they become brothers for life, and you see them in their most difficult situations. And so we had a very strong bond, especially him being someone who was more comfortable in English, and that really changed my outlook on how short life can be, and how you have to find meaning in what you do in this world.
Yeah. So, and you think that set you on your trajectory into your career as, involved in politics and
No question.
yeah.
No question. Yeah.
What is it that married with sort of the ideological upbringing that you had, or
Yeah, I mean, I was always somewhat of an activist, I guess. I mean, as a teenager, once we moved here, I mean, I remember, hearing stories of Jewish refuseniks in the former Soviet Union, and when Natan Sharansky, who I had the privilege of becoming close with later on in life, was released. Um, I, together with a cousin of mine, got on a public bus. I mean, I was 15, 16 years old. And, back in those days, it wasn't a quick ride. You had to take a bus from one place to another to another.
mm-hmm.
But we schlepped to the airport to be there, for when he arrived. The same with Ida Nudel, and the same was true. I mean, this was back in the time of the first Intifada. There was a lot of political activism at that time.
Yeah.
Demonstrations
Yeah.
and a lot of public discourse around various issues. So growing up at that time where I grew up definitely instilled a very strong sense of not only ideology but activism.
So this was like the late 80s, if you're 15,
Yes.
16?
Yes.
And what was going on back then? It was the first Intifada was more or less about to break out?
Yes. The first Intifada broke out, I think it was 87.
Okay.
Yeah. And so there were, there were terror attacks. There were, there were issues, and
Yeah.
that led to what becomes, the Oslo Accords and various concessions. And there was, very deep-seated debate within Israel as to the right path to
Yeah.
dealing with that issue.
And how did you find yourself in New York in the world of Likud politics?
So after I finished my undergraduate studies, it was clear to me that I wanted to do something on behalf of the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I started off in the world of NGOs with a focus on Hasbara. I just wanted to help Israel do a better job getting the message across. My first job out of college was with the newspaper Makor Rishon, but not as a journalist. Nothing against, well, we won't get into that side of things. But
okay, I'm not a journalist anymore. It's fine.
But it was actually to bring an awareness to the pro-Israel community in the United States as to what Makor Rishon was all about.
Just Makor Rishon, just for, I mean, I'm vaguely aware of what they do, but they're
Makor Rishon's a newspaper.
A pro-settler, right?
Well, you know what? It was actually founded as, and I think they've pretty much stuck to their guns when it comes to this. It's actually more of a secular right-wing newspaper. I would say that over the years it has shifted maybe a little bit more towards, let's call it religious Zionism. But
okay.
But some of the founding journalists there were very well-known, very prominent journalists who just didn't feel like they fit into, back in the time, Yediot and Ma'ariv or Haaretz, and they wanted something that represented...
With the viewpoint that, you can correct me if I'm wrong
Sure.
here, but with the viewpoint that the settlements are what, it's a valid project, it's not...
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely on the right side of the map, supportive of...
yeah, I'm just trying to define what you mean by right wing. The secular part I got, but...
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely, I would say, against the creation of a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, supportive of the settlement enterprise, etc.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was my first job out of college. And from there, I went to work at Honest Reporting.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
you really don't like journalists.
Well, yeah, that was really the early days of Honest Reporting, and it was fascinating, and that sort of opened the door to my engagement with people in the political realm. And one of the people that I met through that work was who's a close friend till today, Sharon Sur, a prominent supporter of Israel in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And she was on the board of American Friends of Likud, and called me up one day and said, "Hey, there's an opening here," and that was that.
What did the American Friends of Likud do then? Like fundraise for the party and
So it's interesting because at the time it was really American Friends of Likud was created. It's a completely U.S. Based organization with no official ties to the Likud party here.
mm-hmm.
The only, I would say, semi-official involvement is the World Zionist Congress, which takes place, I believe, every 4 years. And there's in the United States, the representatives of American Jewry that are sent to the World Zionist Congress are voted upon through a national election of members.
Okay.
So many, let's call them interest groups in Israel, not necessarily political parties, but in some cases, political parties have set up, satellite organizations, again, with no official ties, but just to garner support from that type of constituency
Okay.
and increase their representation at the World Zionist Congress.
Okay.
So it was really, somewhat of a shell of an organization when I was introduced to it. And every person I consulted with told me, "Don't waste your time." And it's just there's nothing to do there.
Okay.
And there's nothing real behind it. And there was only one person who has been a lifelong friend and mentor to me, and that's Ron Dermer, who said to me, "Ari, you have nothing to lose. If you go and you fail, nobody will notice. And
Right.
if you succeed,
yeah.
then..."
And for anyone that doesn't know, Ron Dermer was until very recently the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. for I don't know how many years.
Right. Yeah. He was ambassador to the U.S. Prior
Yeah.
to that, he was senior
Funny.
advisor to the prime minister.
How did you guys get connected? I mean, he's from Miami, right?
He's from Miami. He made Aliyah. I don't know exactly when he made Aliyah, but we were first, I would say, opponents, and then became friends on the football field.
Okay.
He was the starting quarterback on the perennial champions here in Israel, Big Blue. And we were a young, up-and-coming team that we played them in the championship a number of times, never beat them.
What position did you play?
I played receiver on the offensive side, and cornerback on the defensive
That's
side.
funny that
Yeah.
Ron was quarterback.
Yeah. He said, what's amazing is that as we get older, and I can't run as fast as I used to, and
Yeah.
you can still throw. We were actually out on the football field together for an old timers game about 6-7 months ago, and he can still throw it downfield. And no one can run that fast and catch the bomb anymore. But he can still throw it. Yeah. Anyway, so he gave me the advice to go ahead and take the job, and I took it. And so I guess to answer your question, as far as the purpose of the organization really was to act as an educational platform in the U.S. To sort of promote and support the ideology more than the political stance.
So when you look back on your time there, does it feel more like a time to study up on right-wing Israeli politics and the Likud?
No, it was, I was well immersed in Israeli politics at that point. I mean, it's every Israeli home, becomes a battleground for political debate on most Friday nights. We live in a society, I guess less so today, but back in those days, when the news came on, and I would say once an hour, but then you have the update halfway through. Literally, the bus would shush down, and the bus driver would turn up the volume, and everybody in this country would listen to the news every hour on the hour, and every evening. There was one television channel back then, and then eventually there were two, but 8 p.m. that's what you did. You sat in front of the television and you watched the news. So it's a very...
Is that a population that's just conditioned to think you never know what today's going to bring. Like some attack or some God knows what.
Right. Yeah, I think, but I think it's more than just the security
Mm.
element. It's a country where pretty much every decision affects you, right? And whether they build a road here, or economic decisions, or healthcare decisions. There's really, in many countries, definitely in the United States, if you don't know who the president of the United States is, it probably doesn't affect your life in a day-to-day, from a day-to-day perspective
Mm.
that much.
Mm.
You can disappear for a couple years and nothing changes
Yeah.
dramatically. In this country, I think that every decision
Yeah.
really has its impact on pretty much everyone.
Yeah. I mean, and also in all those countries, especially the ones that haven't seen war in I don't know how many decades, right? On their own soil, you can essentially just disappear from life. You can live on a farm and everything's sort of fine and
Right.
stable and quiet and peaceful. And several countries, maybe many countries, have this kind of um, parts of the country that are that quiet. So you don't need to be constantly updated with whatever the hell's going on in your country, right?
Right.
It doesn't really impact you, as you said.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's not just the security; it's also just like, would Israelis listen to the news and then hear a new road has been built? No.
Yeah, I mean, they would. I mean, go back to those. I mean, even today, there's parts of the country that there was a bit of a media spike regarding a road that was opened a few weeks ago down south. That was named after the former finance minister Moshe Kachlon.
Okay. He got a
But
road?
He got a road. He got
Okay.
a road, and he's still young and healthy. So. Kol hakavod to him, but back in those days, I mean, there's really been a tremendous, I would say, revolution from an infrastructure perspective in this country over the last decade or so.
Yeah.
So when the Fishesh, was developed, that was newsworthy. That was something that changed the lives of pretty much everyone in the country.
Yeah.
And the same is true for various other projects that have taken place.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, now that I think about it, Israelis are obsessed with traffic, and they really no. It is a topic of conversation for millions of Israelis every single day.
Right.
So a new road that opens up the congestion just a little bit, or even you're right. Like I remember when they put those special lanes.
Yeah.
On the highways, right? Which made absolutely no sense, right? Because I think the carpool lane was on the right hand side, which is right next to where you get off on the exit. But just like in America, it's all makes more and more sense is all the way on the left hand side of the highway. But yeah, I remember it was like there were news programs. Yeah, you're right. That's funny. Okay. Okay, so back to you in New York with your one man outfit.
Right.
So
I think, first of all, the focus really was on education on the one hand. We, at the time, one of the ideas that I had, and I was able to bring in some significant partners, was that the Jewish organizational world had recognized the problem on college campuses. And when I looked at that, I thought to myself, they're right. But most of these people, most of these students that are coming to campus are not in a position to even care or even know enough to better prepare themselves for what they're going to run into. And therefore, I felt that you need to start before college. There has to be a high school program that sort of gives them the tools and creates a willingness on their part to stand up for Israel. And you look at the numbers, the vast majority of Jewish students on college campuses don't get involved. They're not going to Hillel, they're not going to APAC, they're not going to the other organizations that are active on college campuses. So the fight that's taking place is really taking place amongst a minority of Jewish students. And so we launched a program to begin education of Jewish students during their high school years. So that was an example of one program that we did, and there were many others.
Mm.
And at the same time, we tapped into Likud, and not just Likud, Knesset members when they came over to the U.S. And that was something that was somewhat novel at the time. I say they, I'm referring to the Likud leadership, really did not have a deep understanding of the United States, which was shocking to me at the time. There were senior ministers who had served in governments for decades, and they didn't know. They knew very little as far as who their target audience should be, who they should be speaking to, what their messaging should be.
How is that possible?
It's mind blowing.
Like they didn't map out Congress and the White House?
No. And by the way, I don't think that the situation has changed drastically over the last, whatever it is, 20 years since I got involved.
What?
Netanyahu in that sense is really, in a league of his own.
Mhm.
There are a few others, Dani Danon, for example. I'm talking about the people on the Likud side.
Yeah.
Our president today, Bougie Herzog, had a pretty good understanding of the U.S., but most Israelis, and it's so shocking because when you talk to Israelis and Israeli leaders about the importance of the relationship with the United States, I mean, it is the most important thing, from a foreign policy perspective,
Right.
right?
Right.
Our relationship with them for military support, for international support in international bodies, economic support. Culturally, we're most closely aligned with the United States. And yet the amount of time that they invest in learning and understanding the United States is minuscule.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So enter Ari Harow.
So that became
as the guy who can juggle between both worlds.
Right. So back in New York, I mean, that's what, that became part of what we were trying to do, was both educate them, but at the same time use their knowledge and experience to educate the people in the United States. And and thank God it went well. It wasn't a failure, and we were able to grow the organization. By the time I left, we had offices in Miami and Los Angeles and New York, and
Wow.
We had a nice following. And
what is that world like? Is that but is that dictated by wealthy benefactors and their I don't know, their ideological commitment, such as it is to Zionism in Israel? What is that?
So, we tried to move away from heavily depending on those type of benefactors, and moving towards more of a grassroots approach.
Okay.
And having visiting leaders from Israel allowed us to do that, because everyone wanted to come out and hear them. And that was really an easier way to get people involved. Obviously, as a nonprofit in the U.S., you need to raise money, and that was just to fund your activities. But it was more about bringing in a larger membership and expanding our messaging and reaching more high schools and college campuses, and yeah.
So and then from there, where did you go? Is that when you became BB's campaign manager?
No. So I started to interact with Netanyahu even before I left for the job with American Friends Likud. It was actually right around the same time Netanyahu decided that he was going to return to politics. He had taken a 3-year hiatus after the '99 elections, and same Ron Dermer called me one morning when I was living in Jerusalem at the time, and said, Netanyahu's coming back, and I want your help. And I said, tell me where to come. And I was there, and it was a very short Likud primary. Netanyahu ran against Ari Sharon, and literally at the exact same time, I got the offer from Likud in the United States, and I asked them to hold off and see. Let's see how things play out in Israel.
Yeah.
Ron was expecting to continue with Netanyahu into the prime minister's office if that was going to be the path, and had expressed his interest in me joining him. So I waited till after the Likud primaries. Netanyahu lost to Arik Sharon, and at that point I said, okay, I'm going to take the job in the U.S. So that was my first meeting with Netanyahu.
Okay.
And then over the years, in my position with American Friends of Likud, we spent a nice amount of time together, and he did a number of events for us, and he got to know me. And
Did you sense there was a star quality back then, or it was just this is like another politician that you've?
No, it was just it was not another politician. I mean, I can tell you that even after years of working with him, I still felt walking into his office or walking to a meeting with him that this is this is a prime minister. This is a true leader. First time I saw him in person was at an APAC event, an APAC conference in DC, when I was working for Honest Reporting. And I remember just being blown away by his oratory skills and his messaging and his ideological stance. And it was then that I thought to myself, okay, this is a guy that I would love to work for.
What is it about him, if you think about it back then, or even if you think about who he is now, that separates him from the pack? Is it just the ability to speak well and communicate well, or is there some kind of moral virtue that elevates him above the others? Well, what do you?
Well, first of all, I think that the oratory skills that you're referring to are very important.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
He's phenomenal, and once we entered the TV era back in the days of JFK and till today, even over social media, the ability to connect and convey messages to whoever your target audience is just, it's a very unique trait. Even amongst political leaders, you look around, most political leaders don't inspire you. And he has the ability to inspire a crowd or to inspire the listener.
Yeah.
And I think that carries a lot of weight.
But I guess my question is, yes, you can have great speaking skills, but there's got to be some sort of substance, I think, to move, right, and to inspire.
Sure.
So what is that?
So I think that, on many levels, well, firstly, intellectually, he's just a super intellectual. It's rare to be in a room with him where somebody else is on par or, God forbid, above him intellectually. I mean, he's extremely bright and not just book smart. I mean, he's able to read the room and understand what can fly and what won't fly. And again, in a political environment, it's a critical trait to have.
Yeah.
And then I do think that the ideological shift that Israel that's taken place in Israel. I mean, it started in '77 with the Likud's rise with Menachem Begin, and if you look over the past, whatever that is, 35 years, there's a clear ideological tilt towards, let's call it those that political stance, and I call it that political stance because the issues have changed somewhat over time, and there's been peaks and valleys. When Sharon took the Likud in a different direction, and the Gaza disengagement, that was a very that was a moment that had Likud down to 12 seats. Netanyahu in the I think 2005 elections, ended up with 12 seats in the Knesset, and I think that he ultimately was the beneficiary of the swing back to the right when the Oslo Accords collapsed and people were dying weekly in the streets of Israel, um, there was only one place for them to turn, and the only real leader on that side of the political map was Netanyahu. And with time and his ability to, I guess, sort of settle settle the boat and lead Israel out of that period, ultimately benefited him.
I mean, you mentioned the fact that he has this ability to enter a room and take temperature of everyone, and as you said, that's critical for a politician, right? Because the way we communicate is, I'm going to say something to you, but most cases I might mean something else. Like I have a question, but there's a sort of an underlying question behind that, right?
Right.
Or I don't know, you say, "How was that coffee?" You're like, and then you're actually thinking, "Oh, it was terrible," or "I should have been hotter." Well, there's all sorts of games going on, right? That we don't necessarily show. And for people to pick up on that, it's like a super skill, because they're basically essentially having two conversations at the same time. Now, if he can take the temperature of a room, it also strikes me that he's able to expand that out really almost as far as anyone can in Israel, which is like the fact that he can take the temperature of an entire country. I mean, not the entire country.
Right.
It's like, I don't know, more than half the people hate him, but
Right.
it is still impressive. Like, okay, so let's say half the country really detests the guy, but like 30 or so percent really, they admire him. They're with him no matter what. That's more than anyone by
Right.
far, right?
Right.
Can claim.
Yeah.
And the ability to communicate something that resonates with that many people and survive the vicious nature of Israeli politics, to have the kind of career he's had, it's remarkable. And he's back again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that ultimately, it is a unique ability, definitely in the Israeli system. As a parliamentary system, you a political leader or a politician is not encouraged to connect with their constituency.
Mm.
You're voting for a party.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever party you vote for, how many of those Knesset members or potential Knesset members do you actually know? Have you actually heard from? Do you really know what they stand for? And the answer is no. I mean, you can even take the three other prime ministers that we've seen in the last 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Olmert, Bennett, and Lapid.
Mm-hmm.
How many people in the country really have an opinion on them? Probably not that many. And they may say yeah, he was okay. They don't really have an opinion. Like you said with Netanyahu, everyone has an opinion.
Yeah.
Everyone has a strong opinion
Sure.
because this is somebody who has connected with you in one way or another.
Mm.
You may love him, you may hate him, but this is someone who's connected with you. And I mean, one thing that I think is true to all great leaders, and is definitely true in his case, it's not just the communicative skill. It is also about defining your goals.
Yeah.
Something that I ended up working with various political leaders around the world, and I always told them, before you decide on a strategy, before you decide on a million other tactical decisions, let's clearly define what the goal is. What is it that you want to accomplish? And he's very good at that. He knows exactly where he wants to get to and how he wants to get there. And then it's a matter. I've compared it to Waze before. Waze is unbelievable technology, but if you don't put in a destination, then it's never going to get you there. When you put in the destination, it could give you 3 or 4 or 5 different options on how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be very, very clear as to what your destination is. And that's something that I think many politicians lack. They're a little bit more short-sighted. They're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow and what job am I getting, next. There's no long-term vision and long-term goal, and I think that's something that he's always had.
Interesting. And I mean, he does come from a family that tends to look at certainly Jewish history with a very long and deep lens. So the next 5 years is sort of irrelevant, whereas the next 10, 20, 70, whatever is So it's more to the point, right?
Well, I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it is relevant. But yes,
Sorry,
I
no,
do.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I definitely agree. I think that anytime you look at current events, through a historical lens, um, first of all, your ability to gauge the reality and the trends is much greater
Mm.
than getting caught up in today's news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that? Well, I'll ask this in a different way. But so what was it like to work at the prime minister's office? I mean, was it just so your first job was the bureau chief, right?
Well, so I started with Netanyahu in the opposition for a
Okay.
number of years. As I started off as his foreign affairs advisor,
Right.
which was literally anything that had to do with anything outside of Israel. So it was international media, it was diplomacy, it was travel, it was speech writing, and so on and so forth. It was an interesting crew when I first joined. The chief of staff was Naftali Bennett, and the bureau chief was Ayelet Shaked.
No way.
The communication advisor was Ophir Akunis. The political advisor was Shalom Shlomo, who's our current cabinet secretary. So it was a very unique crowd, and I don't even remember how long after I started. Maybe 9 months after I started, Bennett and Shaked resigned,
Mm-hmm.
and it was then that Netanyahu asked me to be his bureau chief, without a chief of staff. So I guess probably roughly around a year before he was reelected. So this is like 2008.
Okay.
I was sort of acting chief of staff, bureau chief, and foreign affairs advisor.
Okay.
It was a challenging time. And then when he was elected in 2009, I entered the prime minister's office with him as his bureau chief.
And okay, and so according to Wikipedia,
Yeah.
which I trust with everything I've got, no, I've actually heard it's quite reliable.
Mostly.
Mostly.
Yeah. Not everything on the internet is, but yeah,
Right.
Wikipedia is closer to the truth.
Right. So so you were in charge of a schedule, which, the prime minister of Israel, I imagine, has many requests on his time.
Right.
I mean, that must be just war, right, for a slot with him.
Yeah. I mean,
and you're the guy sort of taking all the
Right.
bullets and firing them back.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question in my mind that the job of prime minister of Israel is the most difficult job in the world and the most demanding job
In the world?
In the world.
Why is that?
Because I don't. There's few countries, and probably no countries on a long-term basis, that face the type of I would say both existential challenges and significant challenges that the state of Israel does on a day-to-day basis. The possibility of war breaking out in this country has existed every single day since May 1948, and that is something that no other leader in the world or no other nation in the world has had to deal with. There's a famous story of the Israeli prime minister. I've heard different versions of which prime minister it is, so I won't give them credit. But in a meeting with the president of the United States, I think it was LBJ, when the president said, I have to answer to 200 million people at the time. The Israeli prime minister said, well, I have to answer to 5 million prime ministers. So it's a challenging job from that perspective. So it's extremely demanding on the prime minister.
I always when I think about it, what it must be like to be the prime minister, I think what is the, I don't even know if it's the president or prime minister of like a Switzerland or something.
Right.
That person probably goes to bed at 9,
Right.
has his hot chocolate. Like what's going on in that country?
Yeah, I mean that's just
Here
that's
it's
just a blessing.
Nonstop, right?
It's nonstop, and I think that part of the job, it's not a secretarial position. It's a position of you have to understand what's important to the prime minister and to the country at that specific moment
Yeah.
in order to shape what it is that he's doing. And part of that is sitting in on those meetings and making sure that that things are headed the way he wants them, the way we want them,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to follow up and accordingly.
It's a hell of a responsibility for
yeah,
for someone.
yeah.
Yeah. Is that? I mean, you lasted what, a year in that seat?
So I was his bureau chief for like I said, maybe a year before we went into the prime minister's office, and then a year in the prime minister's office that first time.
Yeah. Was it
around,
just
yeah.
the pace was too grueling, or?
It was years of working with him,
Right.
where it's extremely taxing, physically, mentally, emotionally, and I ended up in the hospital not far from where we're sitting right now, in the cardiac unit at Ichilov. I don't remember how old I was at the time. I was in my early 30s, maybe mid 30s. At the time, I had 3 young children at home, and I said, I love the country. I love what I'm doing. I'm not ready to call it quits yet, so I need to step away.
Whoa.
So I
Is that common?
It's definitely common to to feel the effects of the job. One of the fascinating uh, 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 pictorial comparisons that they show is between the president of the United States upon entering office and after finishing his term, and just seeing how his hair
Yeah.
has completely changed colors.
Yeah.
And I think that the same is true for people around a leader. I think that you look at the United States, most chief of staff or senior advisors, don't last through one term in office. So there's definitely it's definitely there's definitely a price to pay for it.
But it's just so wild that the pressure of maintaining someone's schedule can drive a man to having serious heart problems.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. I
No,
wouldn't describe the job really as just his schedule.
no.
Yeah,
I'm taking on board the full
right,
seriousness of the job,
right,
but as you said, you have
right,
to make sure that the time he spends is spent in the best interest of
right,
managing the country, which
right,
is, and as you said, when any day war can break out, or
right.
God knows what, every one of those half-hour meetings or whatever, it's
Yeah,
momentous.
exactly. And at the same time, I mean, he's an extremely hard worker. And like I said, just sitting in on those meetings from 9 a.m. I mean, he didn't start early in the morning, but it was an early night if we got out of there at 9, 10 o'clock at night. When you're doing that day in and day out, and the travel, and like you said, the demands and the highs and the lows,
Yeah.
it definitely takes its toll. And yeah, so at that point, I said it's time to step away.
So then you started your own company,
I started my own company,
which was that was for
consultant
political.
firm.
Okay.
So really, it wasn't necessarily political in nature at its inception. I mean, we did do political work, but it was sort of jack of all trades consulting firm. We did some business consulting. We did some international relations, some nonprofit. But ultimately, it did take me into the world of international political consulting, and I ended up doing some work in various countries around the world.
In just in the West and other countries?
No, did a number of campaigns in South America, in Africa, some in Europe.
All democracies, or not always?
All democracies or striving democracies.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Africa is still developing. But the elections were all held democratically, and
yeah. Did did the experiences that you had in Israel feed or help you in any way with these other countries? Is politics all the same in every country, or
Yeah, no question. I mean, I sort of changed the old saying from all politics is local to all politics is global. We live in an era where the methodologies that are used in any one country can be applied pretty much everywhere else. I mean, obviously, there's local nuance and culture and language and stuff like that, but ultimately, you're using the same strategies. You're using research
yeah?
and digital marketing and all of the different tools of trade that are used in Western societies.
But with the same fundamental insight that what makes us all tick.
Well, with the right polling, you're able to dissect and to dig in a much deeper fashion as to what really concerns the voters. And there's other factors that come into play, which are not only what makes them tick from a policy perspective, but are they going to come out and vote? Right? They may have very strong opinions, but they're not coming out to vote. Um, where is your support lacking? Where is the low hanging fruit? And how is what's the most effective way to get your message across? So there's a lot that goes into it, regardless of what your message is and who you're targeting.
Yeah. In all your years of working with like a Netanyahu and consulting for other campaigns and politicians, do you take comfort in the people that choose to spend their lives as political leaders, or do you have other feelings about that?
You know what? I think that there's not there are definitely not enough true ideologues that go into politics today. I think that there are real leaders out there, but unfortunately, I would say many of them, many of the political leaders, whether it's in Israel or elsewhere, are driven by you know personal goals or ego or other drivers, but there are still some good people out there.
How can someone put up with the stress and the weight of the office if they aren't in this for some greater good? This I don't really understand.
Uh, well, I think that in some cases, again, I'm not referring to anyone. I actually think Israel's a little bit different in that from that perspective, but elsewhere there's
What do you mean?
because I do believe that the vast majority of leaders in Israel, and I mean people that stand um, uh, for election as prime minister, not necessarily every Knesset member, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely most, if not all, people who have stood for election to be prime minister really do have a deep-seated love and concern for the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it goes back to what we were discussing before, which is the immense challenges that we face on a daily basis. You don't have the luxury of doing this for secondary reasons.
Mm.
Whereas in other countries, like you said, Switzerland, right? And then I don't want to pick on Switzerland, right? But wow, that's a really cool job. I would love to do that, right? In other words, that is really your driving point. The same guy that wants to be a partner at a law firm or have a successful VC fund also wants
Right.
to be president.
Yeah. That's funny.
So
It's like what exactly are you going to change in Switzerland, really? Like everything's working pretty much okay over there.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. I mean, the real challenges are in countries that have messed up systems that have
Mm.
real problems.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in many of those countries, you don't really have the vision or the leadership to come in and make significant change.
And now is that a one byproduct of not having the right heroes to model oneself after. Like, for example, in Israel, there's, but I mean, a rather long list, but you
Right.
know, you can already just like we already have a Mount Rushmore, say, of sort of heroic figures that sacrificed this or led the country in this
Right.
dark hour, and so there is this narrative, national narrative of self-sacrifice that okay, I'm going to be the next Ben Gurion, or I'll be the next whatever, right?
Right.
Herzl, so on and so forth.
Well, I take it back even further. I agree with you, but you know, we as Jews have this instilled in us from a young age when we're taught the early stories of Bible, right? Abraham, Moses, Joshua, and the list goes on and on. They weren't just you know religious figures. These are people who led their nation in some of those cases, led them into the land of Israel. So you have let's call it, the biblical era. And then, as you said, you have the more modern era, people like Herzl and Ben Gurion and Begin and Golda Meir and other early leaders.
I take issue with Abraham.
Yeah.
I think he's been overrated.
Why is that?
He,
Excuse me.
I mean, all I know, he's like the first Jew and all that,
Right.
but really, he almost sold his wife to some Egyptian prince. I mean, I'm not impressed.
Right. Well, you know what? I think that there are numerous scandals in the book of Genesis, and I actually, I actually look at that in a very positive light because, Judaism is not a religion of we're perfect.
No,
We don't have
no.
saints, and no, our founders, our leaders, our forefathers, they made mistakes.
Right.
King David,
Jacob, he tricked his brother.
I mean, they all did.
Yeah.
There's nobody. Moses, right? God told him not to hit the stone, and he did it.
Isaac was a fool, right? He just worked to marry the wrong woman all those years, and then he had to do it again. I'm like, well, this is not someone I want to follow.
Right. Yeah. No. So there are definitely lessons. Very strong lessons to learn from those experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of what makes us who we are. But Abraham did, I mean, that's how the book, the Parsha, right, starts when he left his family and left his, he made Aliyah, basically new language, new culture, left the family behind and came to this barren, piece of land in the middle of nowhere. And it wasn't easy, and famine hit, and he has to go to Egypt for respite. And ultimately, I think that those figures blend into the modern figures that you're talking about. And by the way, the modern Ben Gurion would constantly, reference the Tanakh, the Bible. He saw what was happening here as a realization of some of those prophecies, as did many of the other leaders in that generation.
Yeah. And that was a big thing that he did to try to revivify the Jewish myths or heroic tales of the past and bring them into the present. It's powerful. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to create, I know nothing about South Africa, but there was no Mandela, I suppose, before him, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not. My South African knowledge is limited, but I think that, to your point, I mean, many, definitely the older cultures and civilizations have a history.
Yeah.
And I think that in those cases, that history does drive modern leaders to, as you said, try to follow in those footsteps. I think that's one of the challenges that the United States faces now, when some of the founders are being brought into question, right? Whether it's Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. I think Yuval Noah Harari talks about it in *Sapiens*, how to use his terminology, right? The fictional concept of a country or of a nation needs its symbols. Those symbols are what allows you to rally around a flag or to protect your borders, etc. And when you start to dismiss those symbols, or if you don't have those symbols, then it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And I think that we are very strong on our symbols here in Israel. I think we always have been.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that that definitely is advantageous when we look to choosing leaders, because they're brought up on that same dose of symbolism and ideology that we all are.
Okay, so now you have your company, and then for some reason, the close call with death
Right.
wasn't enough
Right.
to deter you another time to come back to the prime minister's office. What
Right.
happened? What
Uh, you know,
the
I think
magnetic
that
pull of Netanyahu? Like what?
it's I think it's really that deep-seated Zionism and ideology.
Okay, but how did you work it in your mind? You made the decision to say, all right, this is not healthy for
right,
me,
right,
and that's a life decision.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you walk it back a couple of years later.
right. So I was actually sitting in a meeting with the president of Paraguay at the time. I was in South America,
Mm-hmm.
and my phone was just ringing. And when I was there, I wasn't answering any calls from Israel, but it just kept ringing. So I finally answered, and it was Prime Minister's office. And Ari, the Prime Minister, wants to talk to you. He said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in South America." So, "Well, come in and see me when you get back." I said, "Okay."
He
And I
called you a
had,
million times just to say, "Come and see me when you get back."
yeah, yeah. Well, that's sort of his style, is you know, come see me in person. He's not a phone guy.
Uh-huh. Is it true that he doesn't have a smartphone?
Well, back in my day, he didn't. I've seen reports that he does today.
Okay.
When he re-enters the office of Prime Minister in the coming days, he may uh, he may get rid of it. But
Okay.
but yeah, he did not have a cell phone.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
What were you thinking when he said, "Come and see me"?
I had an idea, because I was still in contact with him, with the people around him, and
Right.
I had an idea what he wanted, and my inclination and my leaning was exactly what you referred to, which is, I've done it. It was great. I'm so
Yeah.
happy and proud, and but it's time to just move on. But coming, landing in Israel, going up to the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem and sitting with the Prime Minister just like this, one-on-one, when the Prime Minister of Israel says to you,
Yeah, you can't say no.
"I need you,"
Yeah.
the country needs you, and talks about some of the challenges that the country's facing,
Yeah.
It's just game over.
What is that? Is that? I mean, the call to answer the appeal to answer a higher call
Yeah.
is so seductive, right? So in and of itself, this appeal to higher good and meaning and purposes, we all crave it, we all want it. But is there an ego thing of like, oh, okay, well, I get to serve also in that as well? Was it more of like well, look, this is, yes, the prime minister has asked me personally to help, and to take a really meaningful role in his office,
Right.
and this is just way beyond anything that I could possibly do. So, you're consulting and you're helping other people shape their political campaigns, but with the prime minister's office, you're really shaping
Right.
the way this country is going.
Right.
So, was it just a combination of all those things? Or?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't want to be the one to say that it's not about ego, but it wasn't. I was very content in the private sector. I do believe, I'm a big believer in Viktor Frankl's, man's search for meaning.
Yeah, same.
And I do believe that, getting back to the story of my friend Yoshua, at that point, it was a conscious decision that this is my life's purpose, and having the opportunity to fulfill that purpose in life, for myself. I guess that's the selfish side, was dramatic, and at the same time, there's definitely a very strong element of self-sacrifice. You're taught in the army.
Yeah.
I was in a unit where every week we had what's called in Hebrew masat lumkot, right? We had to carry a stretcher. They put, many times the heaviest soldier on the stretcher, and you would, walk through the night, sometimes for many hours and many kilometers, just carrying that stretcher.
Yeah.
And you're taught that you want to get under that stretcher, because if you don't get under there, your friend is going to hurt. Your friend is going to drop, and you want to get under there to carry your weight. And
Yeah.
that was an opportunity where at the highest level I was asked to play a role and get under the stretcher. And with that in mind, it personal freedoms or sort of fall by the wayside.
How did your family take it?
They were supportive.
Really?
Yeah, they were supportive. I mean, again,
They weren't worried about, I mean, just what happened before.
Yeah, I was always in pretty good shape. Yes, the heart thing definitely was a scare, but I was still young and still healthy, and and they shared the ideological beliefs that I had, and they were supportive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you think you could have done it without their support? No, right?
No. I mean, as it was a very it wasn't an easy decision. I mean, it ultimately was an easy decision, but like I said, I enjoyed being in the private sector. I tend to shy away from the spotlight, and I was afraid, and that was one of my concerns going in. As chief of staff, you're thrust into that.
Really?
Much more so than as bureau chief.
Okay.
Yeah, let's put it that way. And
what do you mean, that they put you in front of a TV camera? Or
no. I mean, definitely, that was something that I wasn't going to have any of. But it's just the nature of the job that you're more exposed, and that wasn't my personality, and that wasn't what I was looking for. And,
Okay.
yeah, but ultimately, like I said, it was the Zionism, the ideology, the belief in the cause that drove the decision.
Yeah. All right, so now we should get to the awkward part where you're limited in what you can say about what happened after. So there were two things, right? There's the stuff that you were accused of, and then there's your involvement in the investigations into Netanyahu. I think two of the corruption investigations, right?
Well, that's what the media reports.
Okay.
I'm not aware of two, but yeah, I'm not going to argue that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, when we spoke before this, you said, that you're really just, your hands are tied. You can't really talk about this stuff, which is fine. I'm not trying to get you into any more legal issues, but I do wonder, though, psychologically, how that affects someone.
Yeah.
Because, reputation is such a fragile
for
thing.
sure.
One day you're the guy connected to the most powerful man in the country, right-hand man or so something like this, right? Something to that effect. And then the next day, it's like, oh my God, can we trust this person with anything? Right. There's that thought running through.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I mean, I moderated a conversation. I don't know what the hell that means. I had a conversation in a live event with Jonathan Pollard last week, and so much has been written about that guy, what he did, and it's never clear what is in a person's heart and what's motivating them.
Right.
So just for anyone that doesn't know, Jonathan Pollard, an American guy working for, I think it was the U.S. Navy, right? And he was essentially passing on confidential information from U.S. intelligence to the Mossad in the 80s, and he was caught and sentenced to, I think, 30 years in jail, prison. It was something along those
Yeah.
lines, right? And then all sorts of stuff came out about him, that he was selling it to the South Africans, maybe he was selling it to the Pakistanis. He denies all this stuff. And but the moment he took money from the Israelis, it's like now it's sort of cloudy. Are you doing this for the money? Are you doing this for ideological reasons? Anyway, when I spoke to him, he's just this lucid, clear thinking. He's a religious man. I didn't get the sense that there was any malevolence in his story. He just fell into a trap that landed him in jail for 3 decades.
Right.
And dictated essentially the better part of his life. But he still has that thing hanging around his head of like, well, what did you do it for? And
Right.
and I do wonder like how you
Right.
feel after.
So, I guess before I answer your question directly, I'm gonna take a step back for a
Yep.
second, because we sort of skip over that year and a half that I was
Sure.
acting and that I was chief of staff, and the reason being, and I'm actually finishing up the writing of a book, which, God willing, will come out sometime next year, in 2023. That talks about that period, because I think it really was a dramatic and historically altering period for the state of Israel.
This was 2015.
This was 2014, first half of 2015.
And and you were there at the period when Netanyahu went to Congress, or that was after?
Yeah, no. So I was there when Netanyahu went to Congress. It was everything that transpired leading up to that.
Sorry, let's spell that out.
Please,
So when
please.
he went to speak to Congress against the deal that the Obama administration was trying to cook up with the Iranian regime.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I mean, in a nutshell.
Right.
Obviously, it's a little bit more than that, but yes.
Yeah.
So that whole period, and again, I mean, that's really the focus of my book, but is historical on many different fronts, and really ends up changing the direction that Israel and the region, and to a certain degree the world, takes after that. With the Abraham Accords and other
Right.
other developments that took place as a result of some of the things that happened that year. So, and I mention this because the decision to come back to the Prime Minister's office from that perspective was the greatest decision I could have made. And I'm saying that even in hindsight. I not only as no pun intended here, but a witness to historical events, but to have played, a minor role in that, and to have been there to strengthen the Prime Minister's convictions in when needed, and to weigh in on issues of life and death, and of tremendous importance to our people and our country. It was the culmination, and it was the pinnacle of man's search for meaning, and I think that is something that if I had to do it over, I would do it 100 times over.
Wow.
And
I mean, Netanyahu and Ron Dermer, of course, they always point to that moment being he finishes that speech, and then heads of state in the Gulf in Arab countries say, "Wow, I can't believe you did that." That's something along the lines of, how great would it be if we allied against our common enemy, which is the Iranian regime. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so that's basically the the underlying thesis of my book, which is really that there was a buildup leading up to that speech, with Iran at the center. Iran was always at the center for go back 20 years. That was Netanyahu's focus, and I think that, again, there's various events that took place along the way to sort of shape that. But yes, I strongly believe that was the turning point in the way that the region has now been reshaped. Our ability to stand up to our closest friend and ally and say, this is of greater importance.
Did you already sense it then?
Not with the same clarity that I do today. I definitely, there definitely was a sense of purpose and history as some of those events unfolded. But obviously, hindsight is a tremendous tool when trying to gain historical perspective.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, so that was tremendous. And so, anyways, just so getting back to your question, it's shocking, right? It's and I can't get into the details, but suffice it to say that not anything I was expecting, not anything I was prepared for. And to wake up one morning and have your world turn upside down is is definitely a shock to the system. I know, before I went back to the prime minister's office, after he pitched me at the prime minister's residence, I took a few days and consulted with some people, and I'm thinking of one meeting specifically with former Director General of the Prime Minister's office, who said, Ari, everybody gets burnt, and you came out, squeaky clean. You're in great position. Don't test fate. Just don't do it.
Oh my God.
And as I said earlier, that wasn't what was driving me, and so when this hit, it definitely, speaking purely from an emotional perspective, but yeah, it was extremely difficult, extremely shocking, and that hasn't changed. I mean, here I am, 7 years later, and still dealing with the ramifications of how that's played out.
I mean, can you describe the shock? What did it shock specifically? Your trust in law enforcement, your trust in institutions, what exactly?
So, I guess if I'm going to be, somewhat introspective, there's both, I think you take a deep look inside yourself,
Mm,
and you take a deep look outside. On the outside, like you said, yeah, I mean, there's no question that you look at the world differently. You look at the institutions that are in place that are supposed to protect you in a completely different light. Um, Again, I have to be somewhat guarded, but it's definitely you question, and I do to this day. What drives some of the activities? These people um, who whose ultimate goal is really to reach truth and justice. And from I guess looking inwards, I think we all have sort of an image of who we are,
mm,
right? We all look in the mirror at any point in your life, and you sort of or you feel like you know who you are and what you represent and what you're about, and to be hit with you know the, that type of scandal and situation, it you know, looking in the mirror and trying to figure out how did this happen, was definitely eye opening and uh, a very tough pill to swallow.
did you beat yourself up for being too naive?
Um, it's a very good question.
I just because
Yeah,
I identify with a lot of what
right,
your outlook on life and meaning and purpose
right,
and all that stuff, and inbuilt in that is an optimism, right? That
correct.
you put in the hard work, you dedicate yourself to things that are, you know, essentially the eternal forces
Right.
of life. And, you know, first of all, what else is there? What other choices there? But second, it's going to work out. There is no other path.
Right.
And, you know, if that all comes crashing down, then what do you have left?
So firstly, I think that's the greatest challenge, is trying to get past that, right? That's the greatest challenge for on a personal level, is with all that garbage, how do you dig yourself out
Yeah.
and put yourself back in that position where you can find the good and you can stick to your ideology and stick to your beliefs. Um, well, two things. First, people said to me in the early days, in the early years, as after this happened, you're going to leave the country.
Oh, wow.
And I said, no, of course not. I said, you can throw a lot of things at me. If you take away my belief system, then I don't have anything. And I'm not going to allow them to take that away from me. So that remains what drives me.
Yeah, and that will remain solid because
Yeah.
this story, this fiction, whatever you want to call it, that is Israel with its borders and its customs and its language and its culture. It still provides, meaningful lives for millions of people every single day,
Right.
including yours and mine. So a belief in that project isn't it doesn't fall apart with your personal tragedy. I would guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And I also don't believe in tearing it down just because you have, personal tragedy.
Yeah.
There's room to, fix things. There's room to improve things. But yeah, I definitely think that's part of it. And I think from a personal perspective also, and this goes to, what you were saying. I had a meeting. I mean, this was in the private sector. There was a business that I was working on that ended up falling through for all the wrong reasons. And I was meeting with somebody who was involved, and I said to him, I need to change I can't be so naive. I can't be so trusting, and I need to. And he said to me, and this is a friend, a business leader in the U.S., who said to me, he said, "No, Ari, you got it wrong." He said, "The reason that you got to this place is because of who you are. And if you have to pay the price every so often along the way, then so be it. But you have to stick to your truths and that's a lesson that stuck with me as I went through this and other challenges."
Wow. So was that um, your own validation of yourself, or was that I was good enough to work in the prime minister's office, and so therefore I should be good enough to continue on doing whatever, or and I was good enough to attract clients? Like, were you looking for external validation to say the way I was living before was good enough, or was it a sort of your own thing of like, look, I built my life this way, and I screwed up royally, at this point, I don't know how old you were, in your 40s, I guess?
Yeah.
Early
My
40s?
early 40s.
Devastating, but that doesn't negate all the other good that I did before that.
Well, first of all, yeah, I wouldn't categorize it. I think the result was a screw up. I think that my actions, again, can't get into it, but
Yeah.
I'd call it more of a challenge than a screw up. But ultimately, it's a work in progress. And I say this 7 years later. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't struggle with this.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Because
Really?
it's both, it touches on both internal and external. I mean, you know, ultimately we live in a society where external validation is critical,
Yeah.
right? You want to succeed in business, you want to succeed in community, you want to succeed in anything you do. We feed off of those, social feedbacks,
Yeah.
and when you're concerned with that and how people are going to respond, and is it going to limit my ability to excel or to succeed, then then that's obviously a challenge. And on a personal level, yeah, I mean it's something that doesn't go away that quickly. Let's put it that way.
It's something that I don't know. People should. One of the many reasons people should study Donald Trump is that guy has been tainted by so many scandals and personal.
Right.
And the guy was just the president of the United States.
You know what? There are people out there, including in this country,
Exactly.
including
Netanyahu,
Netanyahu,
right,
yeah,
exactly,
that
yeah.
just they have a very thick skin, and they're able to compartmentalize to the point where it's external issues have a very limited effect on them.
Yeah.
Um, not everyone's like that.
What I do wonder though, like what is it that how they frame their whatever the hell's going on and and the place that takes place in their life. Is it just obviously have to see it differently, and I'm just wondering what that framing is. Did anyone give you a proper framing to say?
No, I got no lessons on how to deal with this. There was no mentor to go to for it. But I do, that there were people who did say to me, that you have to look at it from 40,000 feet, in the sense that life is peaks and valleys, and sucks, but eventually you get past it.
Yeah.
And then it's back to who you are as a person and what your goals are and what your values are.
Yeah.
And that ultimately will work out.
I do also wonder, and this is my optimism right now bleeding into this conversation, but do you ever think, maybe on your good days when you're struggling with this, that the tougher the low, then the sweeter the high will be? It's like, oh man, I came back from that.
So I know that is a school of thought. I don't connect as much to that.
How come?
I don't. You know what? I do have an innate drive. Maybe it's due to the fanatical sports environment I was brought up in. I come from a very mild-mannered family,
Mm-hmm.
until we get on to the sports field or court or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I always did have that drive to succeed, and I think that being able to apply that to this type of situation where viewing it as that type of challenge, meaning, yeah, this is terrible and it sucks and this is going on forever, but still wanting to win. And obviously you can define win in different ways, but being able to get back to a point where you can bloody me, you can knock me down, but I'm still gonna fight, and to the point where I can impact this country and I can influence for the good, and it doesn't have to be in the political realm,
Yeah.
obviously, but I think that more than anything keeps my head above water.
Yeah. You should, if you can, just talk to Jonathan Pollard. I mean, that guy.
So I have a great story with him. So
Oh.
I've actually spent some time with him, and it was one of those moments of pride that
Wait,
I had
since he came back to Israel, or
even before.
even
Before.
How?
Yeah. So post Prime Minister's office, I'm in New York City, running between business meetings, and it was literally running. I was in Midtown, leaving a meeting, and late for my next meeting, and it is raining, and I'm running down, Fifth Avenue, and as I'm running, lo and behold, there's Jonathan and Esther Pollard in front of me.
Yeah.
Never met them before. And I stop. I don't have an umbrella. And I said, you don't know who I am, Ari. But I did speak to Esther when I was in the Prime Minister's office a number of times. And
Just for everyone, that Esther was Jonathan's wife while he was still in prison and was essentially his lead campaigner to get him free, right?
yeah, and she
just died this
tragically
year.
passed away
Yeah.
just not too long ago.
Breast cancer, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay.
And he says to me, he says, Ari, I know exactly who you are. He said, Esther told me that when you were chief of staff, you were someone that she could talk to. You were the only person in that world that was able to share information and be there to support. And then we got on to talking, and we agreed to meet up in Jerusalem when he got there. We actually ended up getting together prior to that, and I've since seen him a couple times here in Israel. But getting back to what we were talking about earlier, that for me was a moment of validation for the job that I went back to.
Right.
Being able to see that in the life of somebody who affected, again, whether, you can question what happened and how it happened with him, but there's no question, and you saw it in every public opinion poll here in Israel, the Israeli public was completely in support of Pollard and wanted him to come to Israel.
No, I guess my point I was trying to make was when it doesn't matter who it is that gets involved in legal issues, especially in countries that are relatively free of corruption. Once they get linked to charges of fraud or breach of trust or whatever, right, or espionage, you just it's always there in the back of your mind of like, I wonder if this person, who knows, right?
Right.
And that's devastating, I suppose. On the other hand, because it just again, just to bring this back to the case of Jonathan Pollard, I was sitting there astonished by this person. I mean, really a remarkable person. But that there is that side of me that thinks, I don't know. I mean, maybe not, right? But it's weird. If I was like literally that night sitting next to a guy, and I was living in parallel universes as I was talking to him, and saying, "Oh my God, here's this guy telling this remarkable story, and of ideological courage, essentially, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's devoted his entire life to the safety of the Jewish people, so he says, and the way he tells it, I'm inclined to believe it. And yet, right, there's that other part of it, right, which is, how the hell do I know?
Right. So there's obviously that cloud that whether it's real or not, right? Is hanging over your head. But I do believe, and I've seen over the years, and I think that when you're faced with these types of challenges, all you can do is look forward. And I'm a very big believer in people, and I think that there's stuff you read in the newspaper, and then there's real life, right? And I remember sitting around the security cabinet table, and then seeing the newspaper the next day and thinking to myself, this is not even close to what actually happened. Like, how is this possible? And I don't even mean that from a fake news perspective. I just think that, that there is a world of, media out there, and there's a world, especially, in this day and age, and social media, et cetera, where things are written Some are true, some are less true.
Yeah.
And then there's sitting here with somebody and talking and connecting. And I think that for me, I think that ultimately, that's where that's where an impression should be made,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's less about a headline that someone read or especially when you're putting that into the context of a political reality, meaning politics could be a dirty game,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of that, when you come home from playing football in the mud, it's going to be all over your clothes. Or as Shimon Peres famously said, when you walk into a perfume store, even if you don't buy anything, when you walk out, the scent remains with you. So
He apparently said a few other slightly more dirty things. But okay.
Right. Yeah. But ultimately, I think that, when you put that into context,
Yeah.
it doesn't remove that cloud, but it definitely, I think,
Yeah.
allows you for a somewhat different path forward.
And how long did it take you to start the new company from the time you got, because you were stopped at the airport, right?
At some point, yeah. I mean, that was in the midst of the whole.
Okay, so you already knew that something was up.
Yeah, no, I mean that was I don't know, a year into this whole episode.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That was
So you left the office, the prime minister's office.
left the office in middle of I left in early 2015, and then I worked on the campaign, and I left after the campaign,
Okay.
which is middle of 2015. And yeah, I went back into the private sector
Straight away.
straight away.
Wow.
And I mean, someone has to pay your bills, so
Yeah.
there's not much room for for vacationing. And yeah, and that was that, and got back on that horse.
And but this wasn't Itur. What you started. What your
No, Itur I launched about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Um,
And what is it exactly? Because there's
so,
not a lot of information on your
right,
website.
yeah. So, well, the company was created as a result of certain, I would say certain realities that I became familiar with, both in government and after I left government, within the realm of Israeli intelligence.
Mm.
One of the pillars, I would say, of Israeli intelligence is combating terror financing. Israel's been at the forefront of that area for decades. Israel was really probably the first country in the world to recognize that
Terrorists need money.
that terrorists need money, and if you can stop the flow of money, you're stopping terrorism. Meaning, it's just as important, just as critical as the units that you send out to arrest people. So I was introduced a couple years ago to the world of asset tracing, which at the time I really didn't know much about. But it turns out that there's ridiculous amounts of money that go missing on a global scale every year.
I saw it was, what was it, like $800 billion to $2 trillion a year?
Yeah, I mean, if you include in those numbers funds that people are looking for, right? Whether it's as part of due diligence, whether it's litigation, there's a lot of different areas that whereby people are looking to get a better grasp of what where funds are, what financial capabilities are on the other side of the table, stuff like that.
Wait, you lost me there. What do you mean?
I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, it could be a straight up investment. We were actually contacted by a significant sovereign wealth fund at some point, and that was about to make a significant investment into a private entity.
Okay.
And they wanted to verify and validate the information that they were given. financially, meaning there are dozens of companies out there that do business intelligence and they, gather information on an individual, on a company. But this is more of a focus on,
The money.
on the money. And so that's not asset tracing per se, but ultimately it's very similar.
Okay.
So yeah, so together with some former Intel people in this country, we launched Itur, and it started off as a service business. We took the know-how, the expertise, the methodology,
Yeah.
and opened up shop, and put out our sign, and work started coming in. And right off the bat, being Israeli and being part of this ecosystem, we said right away, okay, let's go find the best technology here in Israel to give us an edge on the competition. And we started looking and meeting with Intel companies and cyber and and you name it, and we didn't really find anything that touched on this realm specifically.
What I mean, what does that even look like?
Well, I guess the most basic question would be, okay, where does this person bank? Where does this person have financial assets?
How can you access that? Isn't that private information?
In some cases it is. In some cases it's not.
Where people bank?
There, again, without getting into any specific details, first of all, there's there's leaks all the time that end up in the public sphere. And again, you can argue the legality, or the you can argue the decision behind the the legal status of such information, and it is a hot topic for debate. But there's a lot of information that is out there in the public sphere. And that's just an example. I mean, I can give you another example, which is less private for that, from that perspective, and that's corporate registration, right? In most countries, that is information that's accessible, and the ability to connect an individual or a corporation with other corporations that may not be as known to whoever it is that's looking for this is an example. But it goes well beyond that. So anyways, yeah, so we looked at the Israeli market, and we didn't really find anything, and then we started looking outside of Israel, and we found a couple very interesting technologies or databases and stuff like that, but nothing comprehensive and nothing that had some of the capabilities that we thought could be interesting. So about 6 months ago, we I don't want to say shifted, because we still take on cases, but the focal point of the company shifted towards technology. And yeah, we're in the process now of developing what what we believe will be the most advanced financial intelligence platform out there.
And who would use this?
So interestingly enough, and this goes to the point that you made, we found in conversations and in meetings with with some of the biggest players across the globe, that some of these same needs or some of the same pieces of information were valuable in regular due diligence, in KYC, know your client, sanction reporting, compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So we, at that point, started, well, initially our focus was on U.S. Law firms.
Oh.
That was really the initial target market. But since it's expanded significantly, we're talking to and working with some of the leading, Big Four accounting firms, some of the top U.S. law firms, financial institutions, anybody who, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be for investigative purposes. Obviously, for investigative purposes, it's of extreme value as well. But for all the other reasons that I mentioned, due diligence, know your client, compliance, et cetera, This is the type of tool that would give the user or the service provider a much broader perspective of the target that he's looking at.
What's it like to work with former spies?
At times can be challenging.
What? Why?
When you're trained to be deceitful and you're trained to, um, you know, I guess not give straight answers. There's a transition into the private sector.
Okay.
But thank God. I mean, my partners are great, great guys, and I'm lucky. I mean, that was actually, I guess you can call it part of the lessons that I've learned over time, is that it was critical to me to put together really a good group of people, just on a moral and ethical level, and that's what we have. So it's a pleasure.
How how do you guard against um your partner slipping back into that mode of deceit and
Right. No, I think my partners today are quite capable of doing that on their own. They've been able to turn it off, and it's what's unique about that experience is it's less the persona and more the expertise. And I think that
Mm.
the fact that no matter where you are in the chain of intelligence gathering for the state of Israel, you are touching on the need to stem terror financing,
Mm.
and I think that the unique perspective that they bring to the table, and the know-how is really a tremendous asset that most countries can't really compare.
Hmm. Are there other countries that are on the level of Israel in terms of um anti-terror financing activities?
Well, the United States has made it, I would say a central pillar of their activities as
Mm.
well. But just by virtue of you know, uh, the size of that country and the number of,
Resources they could throw at it.
resources
Yeah.
and organizations, it's definitely spread out a lot more than it is here. It's much more concentrated in Israel, so the
Yeah.
know-how is much easier to access.
Got it. So you're and you're also a writer.
I am now a writer as well. Well, I mean, the truth is, in the past, I'd pen opinion pieces for the Jerusalem Post and some other newspapers here in Israel every so often. But those usually came more from a moment of fire in my belly and just oh my God, someone's got to write something about
Yeah.
this. But I did decide that I wanted to share some of the unique perspectives.
Was this stuff that you were jotting down as it was happening, or now you're writing it all from scratch?
I'm writing it all from scratch. I was very sensitive to the information that I was privy to when I was in office.
Mm.
So I didn't keep records, and it was all just stored in my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Writing is tough, huh? I mean, it's your mind is complete chaos, and you've got to make order and sense of it on a page or a screen.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do.
It is definitely not an easy thing to do. I've had some tremendous help. Uh, a friend who has been involved in many, many projects and has really been, holding my hand through this process. And I started writing years ago, meaning shortly after I left the Prime Minister's office.
Mm.
I started jotting things down, and I spent, many, many, hundreds of hours writing. But you're 100% correct that there's a big difference between writing an opinion piece and writing a book, and sort of the the game planning and building a roadmap and the points you're trying to make and how you weave them into various events and
Yeah.
stories is a unique expertise, and thank God I had some good help with that.
There's this. I don't know if you ever heard of the writer. He's dead, but his name is Christopher Hitchens.
Sure.
And when he was asked once how he writes, he says he writes as though I don't know how you pronounce the word, but posthumously,
Right.
as if he was dead.
Right.
In other words, he doesn't care. He's just gonna write the damn thing as though it's the final word that he's got to say on whatever it is that he has to say, and consequences be damned.
Right.
Which is to say, he brings his full force of intellectual honesty and courage to whatever topic it is that he's tackling. Is that this kind of style that you're
Well, I definitely feel like I'm writing an honest and open narrative of the period that I'm covering. I think that
it is a story about your life.
No, it
No.
is not. That may come, sometime in the future. We'll see. No, well, I definitely I appear. I mean, I'm telling a story from my perspective.
Yeah.
But it's more about the events that took place, and from a historical perspective during that period. But in a little bit of a more intimate way. In other words, it's not a history book. It's a story. It's a true story. It's a story that I witnessed firsthand, most of it. And I weave into that, some of the personal experiences that I had while those events were taking place, which I think is unique, because I would say almost all historians are telling secondhand stories. They're hearing it from other sources, and even autobiography, right, has its own its own twist to it. And I guess I'm sort of the fly on the wall while this is taking place, and I believe that it's going to be an interesting.
What are the years that it covers?
It's mostly 2014, 15. I do talk about the early days when I entered the prime minister's office with Netanyahu in 2009. Because, but again, more from a historical perspective, meaning that was when the relationship between, that relationship between the U.S. and Israel and Netanyahu and Obama was sort of, the foundations were laid in that initial year.
Yeah.
And then it plays out again in 14, 15.
Okay. Who are you writing it for? I mean, I know there's a broad audience or something, but when you're writing this down and you're thinking, who's going to read this? Who is that person or people?
So I really think any lover of Israel, anyone who is interested in the U.S.-Israel relationship, definitely has a strong vantage point of how that how critical that relationship is, and I guess certain boundaries within that relationship. And I think anyone who's interested in in history, I mean, it really is. It's a unique perspective on significant events that haven't been focused on. I mean, these events are mentioned in some other books that have come out, but never with a focus on the events that we're talking about. And I guess one other group that I'm writing it for is really, I know my family, my children. It's really my kids were young when I was working in government, and the older ones have some memories, but there's no question that part of this for me on a personal level is the ability to to share some of that with them.
Do you have any boys?
I have one.
One boy.
14-year-old Alicia.
And so how many? You have the one girl in the army.
I have
boy.
Girl, boy. So my 19-year-old is in the army.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 17-year-old who's a senior.
That's the one in Miami, right?
No. So I have 4 in Israel. Well, now 5 so 4 from a first marriage and 2 stepchildren from my second marriage. Um, so, uh, so one in the army, one's a senior in high school. My son is in 9th grade, and then my little one's 10, and then we have an 11th grader in Miami and a 20-year-old who's here in Israel at IDC.
Okay.
Yeah, the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, but isn't it? It's so interesting that we really do want. I can tell from you, but also from me as well, that we want our kids to know, that time that they didn't see us, it was doing meaningful stuff, and just, I don't know how you raised your kids, but my father especially always told me to follow your passion. Do what drives you. Do what makes you just, you just can't stop thinking about whatever the hell that thing is, and you'll be fine. You know, and obviously within reason, right? If your thing is just about your own glorification, it's probably not going to take you too far. But if there's something in there that you know that you really love to do, and also just it's good for other people, then go for it, do it, and you'll find your path. And I don't know, I think I love the idea of leaving a document. It's like, don't ask me anymore, just read the damn book.
Right. No, for sure. I think that it's. I couldn't agree with your father more. I couldn't agree with you more. It's really.
Is that how you raised your kids?
I try to till today. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we have one life to live, and we want to make it meaningful, not just like you said on a personal level. What are you leaving behind in this world? And that is definitely something that we're constantly raising with the kids, and I hope we're successful in conveying that message.
Yeah. Do you think about death a lot?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, lately, unfortunately, more than previously, but yeah.
Because of
Well, I mean, there's been some challenges within the family.
Okay.
And my wife's father passed away a few years ago,
Okay.
and within my family, we've had our challenges over the last couple of years. But yeah, but I think it's less about the finality and more about what we were just talking about, which is, you know, we all we all have an hourglass that is, you know, that is never turned over, and it's just a matter of, what am I going to accomplish? What am I going to leave behind? What am I going to leave this world with when that day comes? Yeah.
Do you sense that your kids have the same outlook? Do you live only once and make the most of it? Or because when did that really hit you? For me,
Right.
it hit me when I became a father.
Really.
Actually, even before, when I first found out that my wife was pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Then you started thinking of death.
So the way that worked was, we were in our apartment together, and we had some cousins coming over just to hang out. And my wife goes into the bathroom, and then she calls me, and she's got this look on her face, and her eyes are all of a sudden like that big, and she shows me this thing, that strip, and I have no idea what
pre-COVID.
Oh yeah, this is.
No, I'm saying because the strip was.
Oh, man, doesn't that feel like a long time ago?
Right.
So anyway, I don't remember whether happy faces, whatever was on this strip that she peed on a few minutes ago, and I was like, oh, okay. And then they come in, and we have, it's like this, just, they were there for maybe, I don't know, half an hour or an hour, and it felt like an eternity, because we had this amazing piece of news to discuss. It's
Right.
like it's happening, right? We've never done this before. What does all this mean? And my cousins were there, and they were talking, and I don't know what the hell they were talking about. So it's just the thoughts were running in my mind, and
Right.
all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, who knows how the mind works? It's crazy. I thought to myself, um, I thought, I'm gonna be a father. Fathers get old. Old people die. I'm gonna die. Right. And then all of a sudden it hit me like, oh Christ, I'm gonna
Right.
die. Right. Like before I thought, yeah, this is just gonna go on forever, right?
Right.
I'm young and what consequences,
Right. Right.
And then, then it's just been this journey of sussing out what exactly that means, right? But
Right.
it took me a while. I was 31 until when my first son was born.
So, is it something that you still think about regularly?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's part of it. I think that our children are still young. There's still an innocence there that I'm happy to have them retain for as long as possible. But that doesn't take away from instilling, the type of purpose that you're referring to.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that, as a parent, and as a parent living in this country specifically, right? Because you picked up and moved here from the United States.
Right.
I came with my family. They picked up and moved here. This was a choice, right? Um, there's millions of Jews around the world who have not made this choice.
Yeah.
So there's really, or I believe, there should be purpose in everything that you do here, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be doing this. I feel an imperative from various perspectives, right? Whether it's a religious imperative or national imperative, etc. But I do feel that is, and that has been something that we have tried to convey, and I've tried to convey to our kids from day one, which is really, this is important.
Yeah. It's a hard one though to convey because um life is this ancient gift, right? It's this miracle. Like every breath you take it's a culmination of a process or many processes that took hundreds, billions of years, whatever. Right? I don't know. Like I can't even compute the process that it took just for me to take in oxygen and breathe it out, right? And and we're so accustomed to thinking about our lives about peak experiences, right? So you went to work for the prime minister's office. I moved to Israel. I married my wife. I had kids. And but our lives are also the silly moments too, right? Like it's the sitting on the toilet in the bathroom and drinking a glass of water and having an empty mind of thoughts. Like all of that is life as well. And how it's hard to strike the right balance of living as though every single moment counts, because it actually does.
Right.
But then the danger there is you're just overwhelmed by the beauty of it all, and then you just can't get anything done because you're just sitting there in puddles crying because, oh my god, like, how lucky am I to be alive and to feel all this stuff.
Right.
And as kids, you just think about the amount of time wasted, right?
Right.
But I wouldn't take it back, right? I have no regrets on any of the time that I dicked around and wasted as a kid.
Right.
I suppose Israelis waste less time. I'm not sure.
Well, they just have different ways of wasting time, right? It's just different. No, I think also in this era, with Netflix and with social media and TikTok and whatever, kids in America and kids in Israel are probably doing a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. No, but I think that you're right, and I don't think that detracts from it at all. I think that there's there's the short term and there's the long term, right? You want to have your ultimate goal, and you want to always remember where you're going, right? You want to be able to pull out that compass and make sure you're still headed in the right direction, but at the same time take in the moment. That's something that I think many people this day and age struggle with, and it's something that's definitely I find worthwhile is really trying to remind yourself as often as possible on a daily basis. So what about today? What about right now? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just taking it in.
Well, what about right now, man?
This is amazing. This is great. It's definitely been
I
fun.
did promise you when I called you, I was like, this is going to be the best conversation of your life, or at least for the month or something like that. So I tried.
Well, it's definitely been fantastic and enjoyable, and I appreciate it.
Cool, man. I'm glad we did this.
Me as well. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, man. Let's wrap it up.
Okay, great. Thanks.